With complete cooperation of all governments, what is the fastest possible ramp-up time to switch to very heavily, very, very heavily sustainable sources of energy?
All right, let me address that too. I'm going to actually give you a little bad news, which is so solar, which is by far the largest available renewable energy resource, larger than wind and hydropower and biomass and geothermal all combined. The primary way that we use solar energy today from a technological standpoint is with solar panels that are made out of silicon. That's, if you're going to buy solar panels and put them on your rooftop today, they're almost guaranteed to be based on silicon. And there are great things about silicon. First of all, there's a whole bunch of it on the planet. It comes from quartz sand. Think about how much sand there is. We're not going to run out of silicon, right? There's plenty of it out there. And they're also, those panels work really well. They're the most efficient commercial panels you can buy are made out of silicon. So it works really well, and there's lots of it out there. But there's two problems with silicon solar panels. They need extremely pure silicon, like super duper pure, 99.9999% pure, and it's got to be crystalline, which means you need to melt silicon. Think how hot you'd have to make something like sand to melt it, to make it crystalline. So there's a whole bunch of energy that you put into making these panels, all the way from extracting that quartz sand, purifying the silicon, melting it down, making it crystalline, cutting it up into the wafers, and turning it into solar panels. All of that takes energy. And then you plug the thing in, and it starts giving you energy back, right? And the question is, how long does it take you to get back the energy that you put in? And there's a term for it. It's called the energy payback time. And the energy payback time, first of all, it will depend, of course, where you are. If you're in a sunnier place, you'll get back the energy faster. So Florida's good, Chicago not as much. It'll take longer in a place like where I live. But that energy payback time in a generally sunny place like, say, Southern Europe, for example, for those silicon solar panels is on the range of a few years, 2-3 years. Now they'll last you 30 or more years, so you're going to get back tons more energy than you put into making the thing, but it's going to take a long time to get it back. Now let me tell you what the problem with that is that if we want to scale up solar to make a massive dent in our energy mix, right now it's like nothing almost of our energy mix. Even though it's growing, the industry's growing like crazy, 30 to 50% per year. Solar industry is growing, which any industry would be thrilled with that type of growth rate, right? But that's not fast enough. If you want to scale up at the speed that's really required to make an impact on climate disruption, I'm not sure if we're going to be able to do it with silicon solar panels, because where are we going to get the energy from to make the things in the first place at the speed that's required to really make a dent? If we didn't care about the time frame, if climate disruption weren't imposing a time frame of decades on us, if we could wait a century, then no problem. Lots of silicon, we can make them, and we'll get tons of energy from that without a problem. But this relatively long energy payback time with silicon is going to challenge us if we really want to scale up solar to be a huge part of the energy mix. That's the bad news. The good news is that there are alternative technologies on the horizon. And that's the kind of stuff we work on at the laboratory where I do research. We work on next generation technologies like organic solar cells. And that's not organic like produce at Whole Foods, like the products back here. That's organic as in carbon-based materials, polymers. And you can do these at very little embedded energy. It takes very little energy to make these things. You can do them super cheap, roll-to-roll, high speed, cover really large areas really fast. Today, the efficiencies aren't high enough and their stability is not high enough to keep them out there for long enough to make a difference, but that's what we're working on, and lots of people all over the world are working on that. So there are technological solutions coming. They're not there today. Today, we can use silicon solar panels, but if we really ramp it up, there's going to be a roadblock there.
So does that mean that really right now what we need to do more than anything is intensely fund research for solar energy? Is that this thing we should be focusing on?
That's one piece of the puzzle. So, I mean, that limit of how fast you can make them, we're nowhere near that limit. We should be making them at 10 times or 100 times the scale that we are today. Even that might not be enough to really make the dent that we have to make to give you a sense for the scale of the problem here. It's only if we were going to get terawatts of energy from solar energy, trillions of watts. So globally, we use 18 terawatts today. And so if you want solar to be a huge piece of that, 10 terawatts or something like that, you have to make terawatts worth of solar panels. You need to put in terawatts to make those things. We don't have that available today. So if you're going to talk about the terawatt scale, you can't do it with silicon fast enough to really combat climate disruption on the time scale that's imposed on us.
So if the focus is rapidly moving forward with sustainable energy sources like solar and wind and geothermal and things like that, are there things that we should be doing to sequester the carbon? Should we be planting trees? Should everyone be planting 10 trees a year? You know, are there specific things we should be doing aside from working on better sources of energy for these carbon in the atmosphere? Should we be, I've occasionally hear terms like, I don't even know what it is, like they something with charcoal or something?
Oh, biochar.
Biochar and planting trees, and there's ways to sequester it in the soil. I mean, is there something else we should be doing?
Trying to sequester carbon out of the air is certainly a good goal. The problem is most things do take energy to do it. There are some techniques like phytoplankton fertilization with iron dust in the ocean that some people think is scary. I think it certainly should be studied. It's a natural system that could sequester a lot of carbon dioxide. But we certainly should experiment with getting carbon out of the air. But the problem is we're putting it up in the air so much faster at the moment. So it's kind of this bathtub, you know, model that people use sometimes. We've got two or three problems. The world wants more and more energy, as Seth says. How are we going to produce that without exacerbating the warming is the fundamental problem. Even if we could magically stop putting more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere today, we'd still be left with a carbon blanket, in effect, that traps enough heat that the ice would keep melting and sea level would rise anyway. So we've got to deal with that. We've got to figure out a way to reduce the carbon that's in there, sequestering, like you say. And then we still have this problem of other resources, water and food, and then the disease. You know, so it's certainly a complex problem, and it's not to make it seem futile or insurmountable. Quite the contrary. I think we need to think bigger. And I do get back to governance. We're governing ourselves, as several people have said here, in a terrible manner. We know that, whether it be that legislatures from Australia to the United States have fallen into the hands of large corporations, as you've named, that most citizens don't vote, in our country at least, but that more fundamentally, I think we've distorted the marketplace. I actually believe the marketplace can be a very dynamic place, but we distort it. We subsidize it, as I said, for corn ethanol, just as one example, but milk is subsidized, and, you know, I mean, all sorts of things, petroleum subsidized. I think we need to, the burden of government is huge because we don't see the real prices, and I think we should see the real price on carbon. As Seth said, I think we need to find ways to show the real costs of things, because most of us will make an intelligent decision if we're faced with that cost, and it's being hidden from us. And I do think that as things get worse in the next couple of decades, which I do think it will, unfortunately, I hope it motivates us almost to I'd say a revolutionary attitude toward how we govern ourselves. And I think sometimes you have to wait for the crisis. As I think Rahm Emanuel, we were talking about Chicago the other day, the mayor of Chicago had a saying when he was chief of staff for Barack Obama that, you know, never let a good crisis go to waste was, I can't remember how he said it, but to some degree I think that the pending crisis, we need to look at that way. I think that we need to be ready to look at how we solve these problems and what our preconceptions are. Again, if letting the planet go 5 or 10 degrees warmer, which is totally inhospitable to life as we know it, is the biggest problem, then that should be a big issue. If nuclear is a paramount issue, as it is to Helen, then, you know, maybe that has to supersede that. I wouldn't agree with that, but that's a decision, and that gets back to having a lot of smart people around the table and deciding your priorities. As Bob says, maybe it's water and epidemiological issues of, you know, disease vectors. The world's changing very quickly. We're running an experiment. We're really running the world's biggest experiment. You know, what is it like at 8 or 10 billion people where you haven't thought these things through very well without constraints and letting, you know, population just burgeon where it will, and Monsanto, you know, the issues with food supply. Hopefully we'll learn from this experiment. The experiment's not going very well right now.
I'd like to say two things. I think that this panel is practicing psychic numbing. Because what I said about nuclear war is true, and you know about it. He's been a member of Physicians for Social Responsibility, and we've talked about this for years, but things are at crisis level. We won't have to worry about global warming because we'll have nuclear winter, but I can't tell you how serious this is. And really, we're not addressing it. It is the most serious issue facing the planet now. Because if there's a nuclear war and it'll occur and it'll all be over in about an hour, that's it. And the United States wants to keep its nuclear weapons. That's why I wrote a book called Missile Envy, a la Freud. Because if you watch the missiles go up, they're like missile erectors. And that's a term the military uses, with two big balls of fire. And it's the generals hated that book, but they all had a copy on their bookshelves in the Pentagon. Things are terribly serious, and we're not addressing that. Yes, global warming is very serious too. So I really want to... There's a big psychology behind this. You know, the etiology or the cause of what we're discussing is our psychology. That's the cause. And then we need to start examining why we do things, how we do things, who are the sociopaths we put in power who have no moral conscience. So that's the first thing. The trees, I come from Australia where we have quite a lot of forests and gum trees, eucalyptus trees, which just explode with, we call them wildfires, but bushfires. We're chopping them down like there's no tomorrow. And I see these truckloads of dead trees going up to make paper and being shipped as wood chips to Japan to make paper. And it's like truckloads of dead people because it takes a tree hundreds of years to trap the carbon. If you use a tree for building, the carbon still remains in the wood. But if you burn it, you release the carbon. In the tropics, in Malaysia, I go there sometimes, they're chopping down their forests. They're wonderful tropical forests with gorillas and all sorts of wild species to plant palm oil. Palm oil is in everything, chocolate and almost everything we use. And the forests which contain these extraordinary species are being destroyed at a hugely rapid rate. In West Papua New Guinea, which is run by Indonesia, the huge companies come in and they say to the tribal chief, we'll give you a motorboat if you let us chop down your forest. Well, the tribes live under the trees and get all their food. So yes, they say, okay, we'd like a motorboat. Suddenly their forest is gone, it's all mud, but they don't even have the fuel to power the motorboat. That's happening all the time. The Amazon, I went there years ago to see it before it's destroyed. They're now making roads through the Amazon, and as they make roads, side roads go off. They're finding gold and oil in the Amazon. That's a huge, huge carbon trap, the Amazon. And it's starting to die from drought as well. It's a quite extraordinary experience to go to the Amazon. The forests here, you've chopped them down from the east coast all the way to the west coast to make paper. And I addressed that yesterday. So trees are very important. I don't know, I don't know the studies that if we all planted 10 trees a day and trees grow quite fast, what difference it would make to global warming, and it would take a long time. Incidentally, carbon dioxide is a fertilizer for trees. They grow faster when the carbon dioxide is higher in the atmosphere, as do all other plants. Just one aspect of the whole issue.
You know, I'm not sure John got it quite right when he said we were conducting an experiment, because it's not really an experiment, because we don't get to have a control planet where we don't make stupid mistakes. And and so what we have going on here, I think the way we care for the environment is the moral issue of our time. And I think, you know, if you want to do something as an individual, the way we get people to make decisions that are not in their immediate self-interest is something that we call religion.
Yeah.
And I think the religions of the world and the religious leaders of the world need to seize this issue, or they are morally bankrupt.
Yep.
Because as individuals, we can go to our churches and our synagogues and our mosques and say, you know, this is really important. You need to talk about these issues, and people need to be motivated on these issues, because if we don't act on these issues, the kinds of things that Helen was just talking about are likely to be the kinds of things that precipitate the nuclear war that she's so afraid of.
Well, we all are.
Yeah, that's true. That would, I mean...
That's not me. I'm going to be dead
that
soon.
She's so afraid of, and we should be afraid of. I mean, I think, you know, if we don't find a way to sustainability that is somewhat controlled, a crisis of epic proportions will get us there in ways that we can't imagine and don't really want to have happen.
What about the Pope?
The Pope.
Yes.
I like the Pope.
I like the Pope too.
Yeah. Finally, we have a good Pope.
He's bad on women, but he's good on everything else.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a big improvement over
Yeah.
the past popes.